The translator's fingers trembled as she read the CEO's medical file, the words irreversible condition burning into her mind like a brand. Kong Min-ho sat across from her in the dim hospital corridor, his jaw tight with rage and shame, and when their eyes met something shifted in the air between them, something dark and desperate and utterly forbidden. He needed her silence. She needed her job. But what neither of them needed was the way his hand caught her wrist when she tried to leave. His voice dropping to a broken whisper that made her knees weak and her heart betray every logical thought screaming at her to run. Welcome, besties. Please like, share, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Nima Okoye had translated for hundreds of powerful men in her 3 years working for Seoul's most prestigious medical translation firm, but she'd never met anyone like Kong Min-ho. The CEO of Kong Industries sat in the private consultation room with a kind of stillness that spoke of absolute control. His tailored black suit fitting his broad shoulders perfectly. His expression carved from ice. She translated the urologist's diagnosis in a steady voice, keeping her eyes on her notepad instead of watching the way his jaw clenched with each damning word. Erectile dysfunction, irreversible, psychological trauma from the car accident, no physical cause, treatment options limited. The doctor's clinical Korean became her careful English, and she felt rather than saw the moment something cracked in Min-ho's composure. The diagnosis had come after months of private consultations, each one more humiliating than the last. Min-ho had tried every treatment, seen every specialist, submitted to tests that stripped away his dignity layer by layer. And now this final verdict, delivered in the sterile language of medicine, confirmed what he'd feared most. His body had betrayed him in the most fundamental way, and no amount of money or power could fix it. The car accident 8 months ago had killed his driver and left Min-ho with injuries that healed on the outside but devastated him internally. The psychological trauma had manifested physically, the doctors explained, and the prognosis was grim. After the doctor left, Min-ho stood and walked to the window, his back to her. Nima gathered her files, preparing to leave with the same discretion she always maintained. Then his voice cut through the silence, low and rough. You will sign an additional confidentiality agreement. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. She looked up, meeting his reflection in the glass. His dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. This information cannot exist outside this room. I understand, Mr. Kong, she said quietly. Medical confidentiality is already part of my contract. Not enough. He turned, and the devastation barely hidden behind his controlled expression made something in her chest tighten. I need your word. Not as a professional. As a human being who understands what this could do to me if it became public. Nima studied him for a long moment, seeing past the powerful CEO facade to the man whose entire sense of self had just been shattered. In Korea's cutthroat business world, any sign of weakness could be weaponized. A man in Min-ho's position, unmarried at 35 and now physically unable to perform, would become the subject of vicious rumors and speculation. His rivals would use it against him. His board might question his fitness to lead. The media would tear him apart. She understood all of this in an instant, and she understood something else too. He was asking her to be more than just a translator bound by contract. He was asking her to be an ally, someone who chose to protect him. You have my word, Mr. Kong, she said, holding his gaze. I won't tell anyone. Not because of any contract or professional obligation. Because no one deserves to have their private pain made public. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or relief, or something deeper he couldn't name. For the first time in 8 months, someone had looked at him with compassion instead of pity or calculation. Thank you, Miss Okoye, he said, and his voice was rough with an emotion he couldn't quite suppress. The next morning, instead of the lawyer she expected, Min-ho himself appeared at her small office in Gangnam. Her supervisor nearly fainted when the Kong Min-ho walked through their door, and Nima's heart hammered as he requested a private meeting with her. In the cramped conference room, he set a contract on the table, but when she reached for it, his hand covered hers. The contact sent electricity up her arm, and she froze. His hand was warm, strong, and the touch lasted a fraction of a second too long to be purely professional. I have a proposition, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I need a personal translator. Someone I trust. Someone who already knows my situation and won't ask questions I can't answer. Nima pulled her hand back slowly, trying to ignore the lingering warmth of his touch and the way her skin tingled where he'd made contact. Mr. Kong, I'm not sure that's appropriate given the circumstances. The salary is triple what you make now. You'll work exclusively for me, traveling with me to international meetings, living in the guest house on my property for immediate availability. He paused, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. And you'll never have to worry about your mother's medical bills again. Full coverage, best doctors, whatever she needs. Her breath caught, and she felt her carefully maintained professional composure crack. How do you know about my mother? I know everything about the people I employ, he said simply, but there was no menace in it, only statement of fact. Your mother's diabetes treatment is expensive. The medications she needs aren't fully covered by insurance. You send money home to Lagos every month, and it's never quite enough. You work overtime, take extra assignments, skip meals to save money. His expression softened slightly, almost imperceptibly. I can solve that problem. Permanently. Your mother will have the best care available, and you'll never have to choose between your career and her health again. It was manipulation, Nima knew, offering her exactly what she desperately needed in exchange for binding herself to him. But as she looked at this powerful man who'd been rendered vulnerable by his own body's betrayal, she saw something else too. Loneliness, isolation, a desperate need for someone who wouldn't judge or pity or use his weakness against him. He was offering her financial security, yes, but he was also asking for something more intangible. Trust, companionship, the presence of someone who'd seen him at his most broken and hadn't looked away in disgust. I'll need to give 2 weeks' notice to my current employer, she said quietly, watching his expression shift from tense anticipation to carefully controlled relief. His shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. 1 week. I'll compensate your company for the immediate transfer and any inconvenience caused by your sudden departure. Money won't be an issue. It never is for you, is it? The words came out before she could stop them, not quite accusatory but tinged with something complex. Minho's lips curved in what might have been a smile if there'd been any warmth in it. Money solves many problems, Miss Okoye, but it doesn't solve the ones that matter most. I'm learning that lesson the hard way. By the end of the week, Nima had moved into the guest house on Minho's estate in Hanamdong, one of Seoul's most exclusive neighborhoods where celebrities and business elites maintained fortress-like privacy. The guest house itself was a beautiful traditional modern hybrid structure that was probably worth more than she'd earn in her lifetime. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a meticulously maintained garden, furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. She had a bedroom, a small living area, a bathroom with a soaking tub, and a kitchenette that was better equipped than her old apartment's full kitchen. The main house loomed beyond the garden, all glass and steel and carefully cultivated privacy. Minho's assistant, a stern woman named Mrs. Park, showed her around with barely concealed disapproval radiating from every precise gesture. Mr. Kong values his privacy above all else, Mrs. Park said in Korean accented English, her tone making it clear that questions were not welcome. You'll maintain professional boundaries at all times. Your working hours are 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. unless Mr. Kong requires your presence for evening meetings or events. You do not enter the main house unless summoned. You do not discuss Mr. Kang's personal affairs with anyone, including other staff members. Is this understood? Of course, Nima said, feeling the weight of Mrs. Park's scrutiny like a physical thing. The older woman clearly didn't approve of Minho hiring a foreign translator to live on the property, and Nima wondered if she suspected there was more to the arrangement than professional necessity. That evening, Minho summoned her to his study to review his schedule for the coming month. She found him behind a massive desk carved from dark wood. His suit jacket discarded and his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms that made her mouth go dry. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment something heated flickered in his eyes before his expression shuttered back to professional neutrality. We leave for New York in 3 days, he said without preamble. I have meetings with potential investors who are considering partnerships with Kong Industries. You'll need appropriate business attire for these meetings. Mrs. Park will arrange it. I have business attire, Mr. Kong, Nima said, gesturing to the conservative dress and blazer she wore. Not the kind I need you to wear. His gaze traveled over her simple outfit with an assessment that felt almost possessive, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. You represent me now. Everything about you needs to reflect that. Quality, sophistication, power. He pulled out a credit card and set it on the desk. Mrs. Park will take you shopping tomorrow. Buy whatever you need. Consider it a work uniform. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation that left Nima's head spinning. She was measured for custom clothing by a designer who normally dressed Korea's entertainment elite, briefed on Minho's business strategies by his senior executives who treated her with wary respect, and given access to files that made her realize just how powerful and ruthless he truly was. Kong Industries controlled half of South Korea's tech sector, with subsidiaries in manufacturing, real estate, and entertainment. Minho himself had a reputation for destroying competitors without mercy, buying up their assets when they were vulnerable, absorbing their best talent, and leaving nothing but shells behind. She watched him in meetings with his executives, saw the way grown men flinched when his voice turned cold, understood why people called him the Ice King behind his back. He was brilliant and strategic, always 3 moves ahead, and he showed no mercy to incompetence or failure. But she also saw the way he rubbed his temples when he thought no one was looking, the exhaustion in his eyes late at night when they worked past midnight reviewing contracts, the careful distance he maintained from everyone around him like he was afraid any real connection might shatter him completely. On the flight to New York, Nima sat across from Minho in the private jet's cabin, reviewing documents while he worked on his laptop. The cabin was luxury personified, all cream leather and polished wood, with a bedroom in the back that she tried not to think about. Somewhere over the Pacific, she looked up from a particularly dense contract and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. The intensity of his gaze made her skin prickle with awareness. "You're not afraid of me," he said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched for hours. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway, setting down the contract. "Should I be? Most people are. They see the power, the reputation, the things I've done to maintain my position, and they're terrified I'll turn that ruthlessness on them." He closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. "But you look at me like I'm just a man. Most people don't see you the way I do," Nima said carefully. "I know your secret, Mr. Kong. I know what you're struggling with, and I don't think less of you for it. If anything, I think you're incredibly strong for continuing to function at your level while dealing with something so devastating." Something raw and vulnerable flashed across his face before he locked it down, his expression going neutral again. "That's dangerous, Miss Okoye. Thinking you know me based on one medical diagnosis. Maybe," she said softly, holding his gaze. "But I don't think I'm wrong. I think you've spent so long building walls and controlling every aspect of your life that when something happened you couldn't control, it broke something fundamental inside you. And now you're afraid that if anyone sees the cracks, the whole facade will crumble." Minho was silent for a long moment, and she wondered if she'd gone too far, crossed some invisible line he'd drawn. Then he said, "You see too much. That's going to be a problem. Or it could be a relief," she countered. "Having one person who doesn't need you to pretend." His eyes darkened, and the air between them felt suddenly charged with something electric and dangerous. "You should be careful, Miss Okoye, offering yourself as a refuge to a man like me. I don't do gratitude well. I take what I need and I don't let go easily. Is that a warning?" Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "It's a promise." Later that night, after they'd landed and checked into adjacent suites at the Plaza Hotel overlooking Central Park, Nima stood at her window looking out at the glittering city and tried to ignore the awareness thrumming through her body. This was wrong on so many levels. He was her employer. More than that, he was a man dealing with a devastating diagnosis, and she was convenient and trustworthy and nothing more. He was vulnerable right now, and any attraction between them was just a natural result of the intense intimacy of the situation. He'd hired her because she knew his secret, not because he wanted her specifically. She needed to remember that, needed to maintain professional boundaries before this situation became even more complicated. Except she couldn't forget the way he'd looked at her on the plane, like she was the first person who'd seen him as human in years. Couldn't forget the rough timbre of his voice when he'd called her dangerous. Couldn't forget the heat that had sparked between them when their hands touched. The electricity that seemed to arc across space whenever they were in the same room. A knock on the connecting door between their suites made her jump, her heart leaping into her throat. She opened it to find Minho still fully dressed despite the late hour. His tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. "I can't sleep," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something else she couldn't name. "And I find I don't want to be alone." Every professional instinct screamed at her to send him away, to maintain the boundaries that were already dangerously blurred. Instead, she stepped back and let him in, watching as he walked to her window and stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body but not touching. They watched the city lights in silence for several minutes, and Nima tried to regulate her breathing, tried to ignore the way her body responded to his proximity. "My father built Kong Industries from nothing," Minho said eventually, his voice low and contemplative. "He was a factory worker who saved everyone, invested in property at exactly the right time, and leveraged that into a manufacturing business that became an empire. He died when I was 25, and everyone expected me to fail, to prove I was too young, too soft, too educated in America to run a Korean conglomerate." His jaw tightened. "I became exactly what they feared I couldn't be. Hard, ruthless, untouchable. I crushed competitors, drove out anyone who doubted me, and built Kong Industries into something even more powerful than what my father created. Until the accident," Nima said softly, understanding dawning. "Until the accident." He turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes made her breath catch. "Now I'm broken in a way I can't fix with money or power or strategy. And the worst part is wondering if I did this to myself. If I closed myself off so completely, shut down every human emotion and connection so thoroughly, that my body finally just gave up. Like it's punishing me for refusing to be vulnerable, for treating myself like a machine instead of a person." Without thinking, Nima reached out and touched his hand where it rested on the windowsill. His fingers were cold, trembling slightly, and she covered them with her own warmth. "You're not broken, Mr. Kong. You're hurt. There's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed. Hurt things can heal, given time and the right care." His fingers curled around hers, holding tight like she was an anchor in rough seas. "Call me Minho, please. When it's just us, when there's no one else to perform for, I'd like to hear my name in your voice." "Minho," she whispered and watched his eyes darken at the sound. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent heat flooding through her entire body. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, and so at odds with his cold corporate reputation that it made her heart ache. "You're dangerous to me, Nima," he said against her skin, his breath warm. "Do you know that? You're dangerous because you make me want things I thought I'd lost the ability to want. You make me hope when hope feels like a trap." "We should maintain professional boundaries," she said, but her voice lacked conviction and she didn't pull away. "We should," he agreed, his thumb stroking the inside of her wrist where her pulse hammered visibly. "But I don't think I can anymore. I tried. God knows I've tried to see you as just an employee, just a solution to a problem. But you're not just anything, Nima. You're vibrant and alive and real in a way nothing else in my life has been for years." The next morning, Nima woke alone in her bed and wondered if she'd imagined the entire encounter. But when she met Minho for breakfast in his suite, the heat in his eyes told her it had been very real. They had meetings all day with potential investors, venture capitalists considering partnerships with Kong Industries' new artificial intelligence division. She translated with her usual precision while being hyper-aware of every time his hand brushed hers passing documents, every time his attention lingered on her face instead of the presentations, every subtle shift in his breathing when she leaned close to whisper translations of side conversations. The investors were impressed with both the technology and Minho's vision for implementation. He was magnetic in business mode, confident and commanding, painting pictures of future possibilities that made even skeptical financiers lean forward with interest. Nima watched him work and understood why he'd built such a powerful empire. He didn't just sell products or services. He sold dreams, possibilities, the promise of being part of something transformative. During a break between meetings, a young executive named James Thompson approached Nima with a charming smile. He was American, probably early 30s, conventionally handsome in that clean-cut MBA way. "You're doing amazing work today," he said. His attention focused entirely on her. "Your translation is so smooth I sometimes forget you're even doing it. Are you free for dinner tonight? I'd love to hear more about how you got into this field and what it's like working with the legendary Ice King." Before she could formulate a polite refusal, Min-ho appeared at her side with the silent predatory grace of a hunting cat. His hand settled possessively on her lower back, the touch burning through the silk of her blouse. "Miss Okoye has dinner plans with me," he said. His voice perfectly polite but his eyes glacial. "We have strategy to discuss for tomorrow's presentations. Perhaps another time, Mr. Thompson." James backed off immediately, recognizing the territorial claim in Min-ho's body language, even if he didn't understand the intensity behind it. "Of course, Mr. Kong. My apologies for the presumption." After James retreated, Nima turned to look at Min-ho and found his jaw clenched tight, his shoulders rigid with barely controlled tension. In the car back to the hotel, he stared out the window in stony silence while she tried to figure out if she was angry or thrilled or some confusing combination of both. Finally, unable to bear it anymore, she said, "That was unprofessional. He was flirting with you." Min-ho's voice was flat and cold, the tone he used in business when someone had made a critical mistake. He was being friendly. Friendly and interested are not the same thing. "He wanted you." Min-ho turned to face her, his eyes blazing with barely controlled intensity. "I saw the way he looked at you, the way he positioned himself in your space. He wanted to take you to dinner, charm you, make you laugh, and then take you back to his hotel room and touch what's mine." Nima's heart pounded at the raw possessiveness in his voice. "I'm not yours, Min-ho. I'm your employee. There's a significant difference. You stopped being just my employee the moment you let me into your room last night," he said, his voice dropping to something rough and intimate. "The moment you touched my hand and offered me comfort instead of pity. The moment you looked at me like I was still a man worth wanting despite everything I told you about what I can't give you." His hand found hers in the space between them on the leather seat. "Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me I'm imagining the way your pulse races when I'm near, the way your breathing changes when I look at you, the way you lean toward me like a plant seeking sunlight." She couldn't. God help her, she couldn't lie about the electricity that sparked between them, the way her body came alive under his gaze, the dreams she'd had the past few nights that left her aching and confused and desperate for things she shouldn't want from her employer. "This is complicated," she managed. "I know. You're my boss. There's an inherent power imbalance that makes anything between us ethically questionable at best. I know. And you're dealing with something traumatic. You're vulnerable right now, and I don't want to take advantage of that vulnerability. I don't want to be something you regret when you're healed and back to your normal life." Min-ho's laugh was bitter, almost harsh. "You think you're taking advantage of me? Nima, I'm the one who engineered this entire situation. I'm the one who researched you after that hospital visit, who found out everything about your life, who created a position specifically designed to bind you to me because I couldn't stop thinking about you." His grip tightened on her hand. "I'm the one who's taking advantage, and I can't bring myself to care because being near you is the first time I felt anything but empty in 8 months. You make me feel human again. You make me want to be human again instead of the corporate machine I've trained myself to be." That evening, instead of discussing strategy for tomorrow's meetings, Min-ho ordered room service to his suite from Nima's favorite Nigerian restaurant, the one she'd mentioned once in passing during a casual conversation. He'd clearly researched what to order, and when the food arrived, she found jollof rice, suya, and plantains presented with the kind of care that made her chest tight with emotion. "You did this for me," she said, staring at the spread. "I wanted you to feel less homesick," he said simply. And I wanted to show you that I pay attention when you talk about things that matter to you. They sat on the plush couch in his suite's living area, eating and talking, and Nima found herself opening up about her life in ways she rarely did. She told him about growing up in Lagos in a middle-class family that struggled after her father's death, about her mother's fierce determination to give her opportunities through education, about the scholarship that brought her to Korea, and the loneliness of being foreign in a country that didn't always welcome outsiders. She told him about learning Korean, about the small moments of cultural disconnect that sometimes made her feel like she'd never truly belong, about the pride she felt when she successfully bridged communication gaps between people from different worlds. Minho listened with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced before. He didn't interrupt or offer platitudes. He just listened, his full attention on her, and when she asked about his life, he opened up about things she suspected he'd never told anyone. The pressure of legacy, of carrying his father's dream forward while making it his own. The isolation that came with power, where every interaction was colored by what people wanted from him. The weight of always being watched and judged, of representing not just himself but an entire corporation and the thousands of people whose livelihoods depended on his decisions. I haven't had a real conversation with anyone in years, he admitted. His voice rough with emotion he usually kept locked away. Everyone wants something from me. Everyone has an agenda, an angle they're working. Except you. I want things from you too, Nima said honestly, refusing to let him idealize her. Financial security, career opportunity, the ability to help my mother without bankrupting myself. I'm not some selfless angel, Minho. I took this job because I needed what you were offering. But you see me first, he said, moving closer on the couch until their thighs almost touched. You look at me and see a person, not a position or a bank account or a tool to be used for advancement. When you translated my diagnosis, you could have looked at me with pity or disgust or glee at having leverage over someone powerful. Instead, you looked at me with compassion. Like my pain mattered to you even though you barely knew me. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her full bottom lip with a touch so gentle it made her breath hitch. Nima's entire body responded to that simple contact, heat pooling low in her belly, her skin suddenly too sensitive, her heart hammering against her ribs. Minho, we can't, she whispered, but she didn't pull away. Tell me you don't want me, he whispered back, his face inches from hers, his breath ghosting across her skin. Tell me you don't think about this when you're alone at night. Tell me you don't wonder what it would feel like if I kissed you. She couldn't. His mouth captured hers in a kiss that stole her breath and her rationality, and she melted into him with a small sound of surrender that seemed to undo him completely. He kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning for months, his hands tangling in her braids with a careful reverence that made tears prick her eyes. She kissed him back just as desperately, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, needing more of this connection that felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff simultaneously. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard, and his eyes were dark with desire and something deeper that scared her almost as much as it thrilled her. Come to bed with me, he said, his voice rough with want and vulnerability. Let me hold you, me touch you. Let me prove that parts of me still work even if others don't. Nima should have said no. Should have maintained the boundaries that were already thoroughly shattered. Should have protected herself from the inevitable heartbreak when this arrangement ended, and he moved on to someone more suitable. Instead, she let him lead her to his bedroom, her hand clasped in his like a lifeline. She let him undress her with reverent hands that trembled slightly, his eyes drinking in every curve of her body like she was art he wanted to memorize. She let him worship her with his mouth and hands, taking his time to learn what made her gasp and arch and plead. And when they finally came together in the darkness, when his body responded to hers with a passion that surprised them both given what the doctors had said, when he buried his face in her neck and whispered her name like a prayer, she knew she was already too far gone to protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak. Because this wasn't just physical. This was emotional, spiritual, a connection that went deeper than anything she'd experienced before. She was falling in love with Kang Min-ho, and there was no safety net waiting to catch her when he realized she wasn't what he really needed. Later, while he slept with his arm wrapped possessively around her waist, his face peaceful in a way she'd never seen while he was awake, Nima stared at the ceiling and felt panic rising in her chest like a tide. This was temporary. He was healing, working through trauma, and she was convenient and safe and accepting. Once he recovered, once he no longer needed her to feel whole and masculine and powerful, he'd move on to women more appropriate for a man of his status. Korean women from proper families who understood his world and could navigate high society without being seen as exotic outsiders. American or European women if he wanted to maintain international connections. Women who hadn't been hired primarily because they knew his most humiliating secret. She'd been a fool to let herself believe in the heat of his gaze, the reverence in his touch, the possessiveness in his voice when he'd warned off James Thompson. This was a fantasy, a beautiful, impossible dream, and she needed to protect herself before she got in so deep that leaving would destroy her completely. Before dawn painted the sky purple and gold, before Minho woke and trapped her with those knowing eyes and that devastating smile, Nima slipped out of his bed and returned to her own suite. She moved silently through the connecting door, gathering her scattered clothes, and dressed quickly in the bathroom with tears streaming down her face that she couldn't quite explain. She wasn't sad exactly. She was terrified. Terrified of how much she wanted this. Terrified of how right it had felt to be in his arms. Terrified of the inevitable moment when he realized she wasn't enough and sent her away with a generous severance package and polite professional distance. When Minho woke to find her gone, to find the space beside him cold and empty like she'd never been there at all, the devastation on his face would have shattered her if she'd seen it. He sat up immediately, his heart pounding with something close to panic. For a few precious hours, he'd held something real and warm and honest, and now she'd vanished like he'd imagined the whole thing. He called her sweet immediately, but she didn't answer, and he cursed himself for pushing too hard, moving too fast, letting his need for her override his usual careful strategy. He went to her door and knocked, his voice urgent and rough. "Nima, please. We need to talk about last night. I need to know you're okay." He pressed his palm against the door, imagining he could feel her on the other side. "I know this is complicated. I know I crossed lines that shouldn't have been crossed. But please don't run from me. Don't make me chase you when all I want is to make sure I didn't hurt you." Nima leaned against the door, her hand pressed against the wood in the same place his was on the other side, tears streaming down her face harder now. She wanted to open the door, wanted to throw herself into his arms and pretend this could work, but she couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Eventually, she heard him leave, heard him on the phone speaking rapid angry Korean to someone, probably making arrangements to send her home and end this disaster of an arrangement before it became even messier. But at breakfast, which she forced herself to attend with professional composure and carefully applied makeup hiding the evidence of her tears, Minho simply behaved as if nothing had happened. He was cool and distant, all business, reviewing the day's schedule and discussing talking points for their meetings with the same clinical precision he used in every professional interaction. He didn't mention last night. Didn't ask why she'd left. Didn't show any sign that he'd been affected by her absence when he woke. Nima told herself this was better, cleaner. They could pretend last night was an aberration caused by jet lag and proximity and stress, and move forward with the actual job she'd been hired to do. Except it hurt worse than she'd expected. His careful distance felt like rejection even though she'd been the one to run. His professional demeanor felt like dismissal even though she'd been the one to re-establish boundaries. She'd wanted protection from future heartbreak, but all she'd achieved was present pain. They flew back to Seoul 2 days later in strained silence. Minho worked the entire flight, barely looking up from his laptop, while Nima pretended to sleep in her seat across from him. But she felt his eyes on her constantly, felt the weight of words unspoken hanging between them like a physical barrier. Several times she almost broke, almost said something to shatter the awful tension, but fear kept her silent. Fear that he'd confirm her worst suspicions, that last night had meant nothing, that she'd been convenient and temporary and ultimately forgettable. The following week, Minho threw himself into work with an intensity that worried even his most dedicated staff members. He scheduled back-to-back meetings from dawn until midnight, traveled to 3 different cities for site inspections and investor presentations, and barely slept according to Mrs. Park, who reported his schedule to Nima with increasing concern. Nima translated and took notes and maintained professional distance while her heart ached every time she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the tight set of his shoulders, the way he rubbed his temples like his head was pounding. He didn't touch her except when absolutely necessary for work. Didn't seek her out outside of scheduled appointments. Didn't reference New York or what had happened between them. It was exactly what she'd wanted when she ran from his room, and it was killing her slowly. Then Park Jin-woo entered the picture like a storm cloud rolling over clear sky. The heir to Jin-woo Technologies and second son of one of Korea's oldest chaebol families. Jin-woo attended the same charity gala as Min-ho 2 weeks after their return from New York. The event was at a luxury hotel in Gangnam, the kind of affair where Korea's elite gathered to see and be seen while writing large checks for fashionable causes. Nima wore a custom gown in deep emerald that made her dark skin glow. Her hair swept up in an elegant style, and she felt eyes on her from the moment she entered on Min-ho's arm. Jin-woo made his interest immediately obvious. He was handsome in that polished chaebol way, with a charming smile and easy confidence born from generational wealth. He approached during cocktail hour while Min-ho was speaking with a group of politicians, and his attention focused entirely on Nima like she was the most fascinating person in the room. "I don't believe we've met," he said in perfect English, his smile warm and engaging. "Park Jin-woo. And you are?" "Nima Okoye," she said, accepting his handshake. "I'm Mr. Kang's translator." "Just his translator." Jin-woo's eyes sparkled with interest. "I find that hard to believe. A woman like you must be far more than that." Before she could respond, Min-ho appeared at her side with a silent predatory grace she'd come to recognize. His hand settled on her lower back possessively, the touch burning through the silk of her gown. "Jin-woo," he said, his voice perfectly polite but his eyes glacial. "I wasn't aware your family had accepted the invitation to this event." "Last-minute decision," Jin-woo said easily, but his attention stayed on Nima. "I'm very glad I came. Miss Okoye, I'd love to hear more about your work. Perhaps we could have coffee sometime. I'm always interested in meeting talented people." Nima opened her mouth to politely refuse, but Jin-woo was already offering his business card with another charming smile. "My personal number is on there. Call any time." For the rest of the evening, Nima felt Min-ho's tension radiating like heat from a furnace. He stayed close to her, his hand almost always touching her back or arm or waist, his body positioned between her and other men who approached. When Jin-woo caught her eye from across the room and raised his champagne glass in a small toast, Min-ho's jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. In the car afterward, he stared out the window in stony silence until she finally broke and said, "Are you going to talk to me or just brood all night? You gave Park Jin-woo your attention." His voice was flat and cold, each word carefully measured. He was being friendly at a social event. That's how networking works, Min-ho. He was flirting with you, and you let him. I was being professional. Nima felt her own frustration rising to match his. What was I supposed to do? Be rude to a potential business contact? He's not a potential business contact. He's my competitor and my enemy. Min-ho finally turned to face her, his eyes blazing with barely controlled fury and something deeper. "And he was looking at you like he wanted to devour you. Like he was already planning how to take you from me. I'm not yours to take, Min-ho." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "You made that very clear these past 2 weeks with your careful distance and your professional demeanor. We're employer and employee. Nothing more." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with controlled strength that made her pulse hammer. "You're mine, Nima. You've been mine since the moment you touched my hand in that hospital and told me I wasn't broken. Since the moment you let me into your room in New York. Since the moment you opened yourself to me and made me feel human again for the first time in 8 months. You didn't come after me," she said, and heard her voice crack with the pain she'd been suppressing. "That morning in New York, I left your bed and you didn't come after me. You just acted like nothing had happened. You ran before I could tell you that last night meant everything to me," he said, his voice rough with emotion he usually kept locked away. "That waking up with you in my arms was the first time I felt whole in so long I'd forgotten what it was like. That watching you sleep, I realized I was falling in love with you, and it terrified me because I don't know how to love someone without consuming them completely. His grip gentled but didn't release. You ran, and I let you go because I thought that's what you wanted. But seeing another man touch you, watching you smile at him the way you used to smile at me, I realized I don't care what's proper or professional or rational. You're mine, and I'm keeping you. Nima's heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe. You can't just decide that, Minho. Love doesn't work that way. You can't claim someone who doesn't want to be claimed. Tell me you don't want this. His other hand came up to cup her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Tell me you don't think about that night in New York. Tell me you don't ache for me the way I ache for you. Tell me you'd rather be with someone safe and appropriate like Park Jin-woo than with me. She couldn't. God help her, she couldn't lie when he was looking at her like that, touching her like she was precious and necessary and entirely his. This is insane, she whispered. I know. I don't care. He leaned his forehead against hers, and she felt him trembling with the force of his restraint. I need you, Nima. Not as my translator. Not as a convenient solution to my loneliness. I need you as my partner, my lover. My reason for being more than just the Ice King everyone fears. You make me want to be human again. That night, Minho showed up at her guest house unannounced, hours after they'd returned from the gala. He carried takeout from her favorite Nigerian restaurant in one hand and hope in his eyes. I'm not good at this, he admitted as she let him in, as they sat on her small couch with the food spread between them. Romance, relationships, emotional vulnerability. I've spent my entire adult life avoiding all of it because it's messy and unpredictable and it makes you weak. My father taught me that weakness gets you destroyed in our world. But I'd rather be weak and have you than strong and alone, he continued, reaching for her hand. These past 2 weeks without you have been torture. Going back to keeping distance, to treating you like just an employee, to pretending I don't think about you every second of every day. I can't do it anymore, Nima. I don't want to do it anymore. Nima felt tears burning in her eyes. I was trying to protect myself from getting hurt when you realized I wasn't what you really needed, that I was just convenient while you were healing. You are what I need, Minho said fiercely. You're everything I need. Not because you're convenient, but because you're you. Because you see past the Ice King to the man underneath. Because you challenge me and comfort me and make me want to be better. His thumb stroked her knuckles. I'm 35 years old. I don't have time to waste on slow courtship when I know what I want. And I want you. Not as my translator. Not as a secret. As my partner. My lover. Eventually, if you'll have me as my wife. Nima's breath caught, and she couldn't quite process what he was saying. You barely know me, Minho. I know enough. I know you're brilliant and kind and strong enough to stand up to me when I'm being impossible. I know you send half your salary to your mother without complaint because family loyalty means everything to you. I know you cry during sad movies and laugh at terrible jokes and you hum when you concentrate on difficult translations. His free hand cupped her face with infinite tenderness. I know that being with you makes me want to be better. Not just physically, though God knows you healed something in me I thought was permanently broken. But emotionally, spiritually, I want to be the kind of man who deserves you. And I want the chance to prove I can be that man. When he kissed her this time, it was tender and searching, asking questions instead of demanding answers. Nima kissed him back with all the longing she'd been suppressing for 2 weeks, and when he pulled her into his lap, when his hands mapped her curves with reverent possession, she stopped fighting what she felt and let herself fall. Stay with me tonight, she whispered against his mouth, her hands tangling in his hair. And don't leave before I wake up this time. Never again, he promised, and she believed him. They made love slowly that night, taking time to truly learn each other's bodies and boundaries, discovering what made each other gasp and arch and plead. Minho worshipped her curves with his hands and mouth, telling her in Korean and English how beautiful she was, how perfect, how completely his. And when they finally came together, when he buried himself inside her with a groan that sounded like relief and homecoming, Nima wrapped herself around him and let herself believe this might actually work. Afterward, Minho held her close and whispered words in Korean that she didn't understand but felt in her soul. What did you say? she asked sleepily, tracing the lines of his face with gentle fingers. I said you're the only home I've ever known, he translated, pressing kisses to her forehead, her temples, her lips. I said I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of the gift you've given me. I said I love you in ways I didn't know I was capable of loving anyone. The next morning, Min-ho announced to his shocked staff that Nima was no longer just his translator. She was his partner in every sense of the word, and anyone who had a problem with that could find employment elsewhere. Mrs. Park looked like she'd swallowed something bitter, but she didn't quit. None of them did, because for all his ruthlessness, Min-ho commanded absolute loyalty through a combination of generous compensation and the certain knowledge that betraying him meant professional destruction. Jin-woo didn't take the public rejection well. He started showing up at places he knew Nima would be, sending elaborate flower arrangements to her office at the main house, making pointed comments at industry events about how Min-ho was slumming with inappropriate women who didn't understand Korean culture or proper social hierarchies. His friends picked up the refrain, and soon there was a subtle campaign of whispers and raised eyebrows whenever Nima appeared with Min-ho at social functions. Min-ho's response was swift and calculated. He systematically destroyed 2 of Jin-woo's major business deals by outbidding him on crucial contracts, acquired a controlling interest in one of his subsidiary companies and promptly restructured it out of profitability, and made it crystal clear through back channels that anyone who disrespected Nima would face similar consequences. Within a week, the whispers stopped and people were tripping over themselves to be gracious to the Ice King's foreign girlfriend. You didn't have to do that, Nima said when she heard what he'd done through Mrs. Park's carefully neutral report. Yes, I did. Min-ho's eyes were hard as diamonds when he looked at her. You're under my protection now. That means something in my world. It means no one touches you, no one disrespects you, and no one makes you feel like you don't belong. 'Cause you do belong. With me. And I will destroy anyone who tries to make you doubt that. But Jin-woo had powerful connections of his own, and he didn't appreciate being humiliated by someone he viewed as an upstart who'd gotten lucky with inherited wealth. 3 weeks after Min-ho's retaliation, Nima was leaving a late meeting at Kong Industries headquarters when a black van pulled up beside her on the street. 2 men got out, Korean, built like professional fighters, and they grabbed her before she could scream. One threw her roughly into the van while the other covered her mouth with a gloved hand. She fought wildly, terror overwhelming rational thought, kicking and scratching and trying to bite, but they were too strong and too practiced. A cloth pressed over her mouth and nose, and she smelled something chemical and sweet before the world went dark. She woke in a dank warehouse with her head pounding and her wrists zip-tied painfully behind her back. The space was industrial and abandoned, with broken windows letting in weak afternoon light and the smell of rust and decay. Jin-woo sat across from her in an expensive leather chair that looked absurd in the industrial wasteland. His expression cold and calculating. Nothing personal, Miss Okoye, he said in that same charming voice he'd used at the gala. But Min-ho needs to learn that he can't destroy what's mine without consequences. He needs to understand that actions have prices. I was never yours, she spat, her voice hoarse and her head spinning. You asked me for coffee and I never called. That doesn't give you ownership. No, but you're definitely his. I can see it in the way he looks at you, the way he changed his entire life to accommodate you. And that makes you valuable as leverage. Jin-woo smiled coldly, and she saw the cruelty beneath the polished exterior. He'll come for you. Men like Min-ho always come for what they consider theirs. And when he does, we'll be ready with cameras and witnesses. We'll prove he's unstable, emotionally compromised, unfit to lead his company. His board will remove him, his reputation will be destroyed, and I'll pick up the pieces of his empire for pennies on the one. Min-ho received the ransom video on his phone during a crucial board meeting to discuss the next quarter's projections. The sight of Nima bound and terrified, with a visible bruise forming on her cheek where someone had hit her, made something violent and primal rise in his chest that he'd never felt before. Pure protective rage. The kind of fury that made men kill without hesitation or remorse. He left the meeting without explanation, his executives calling after him in confusion, and within an hour had assembled a team of security specialists and 2 of his own executives who'd served in Korea's special forces before joining the corporate world. I want her back unharmed, he said. his voice flat and cold and absolutely terrifying in its control. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what it takes. I don't care if we have to burn down half of Seoul. And I want Park Jin-woo destroyed so completely that his family name becomes synonymous with failure and disgrace. No mercy. No half measures. Total annihilation. The address came through an hour later, traced through contacts Min-ho had cultivated in law enforcement and intelligence circles through years of strategic donations and mutually beneficial arrangements. He rode in the lead vehicle with a loaded gun in his lap, his expression carved from ice, his hands perfectly steady despite the fear eating him alive inside. No one hurts her, he said to his team. The men who took her, the men who are guarding her, they're all guilty. But she doesn't see violence. She doesn't get traumatized more than she already has been. We go in fast, we extract her immediately. And then I handle Jin-woo personally. The rescue was swift and brutal in its efficiency. Min-ho's team breached the warehouse from 3 sides simultaneously, and the guards Jin-woo had posted never stood a chance against trained operatives with military precision and overwhelming motivation. Min-ho found Nima in the back room where they'd been keeping her and felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. She was alive, shaken but alive, bruised but not broken. He cut her zip ties with shaking hands, pulled her into his arms with a force that made her gasp, and held her so tightly she couldn't breathe properly. "I've got you," he whispered in Korean and English, his voice breaking on the words. "I've got you. You're safe now. No one will ever touch you again. I swear on everything I have, I will keep you safe." Jin-woo tried to run when he heard the commotion, but Min-ho's men caught him at the warehouse door. Min-ho handed Nima carefully to his head of security with precise instructions to take her to his private doctor immediately, then turned to face the man who'd dared to touch what was his. What happened next was swift and savage, and by the time Min-ho walked away wiping blood from his knuckles, Jin-woo was on the ground bleeding and broken, knowing his business empire would be dismantled piece by piece until nothing remained but debt and disgrace. In the car speeding toward the private medical clinic, Nima finally broke down, sobbing against Min-ho's chest while he held her and whispered soothing words in Korean and English. "I thought I'd never see you again," she choked out between sobs. "I thought they'd kill you when you came for me. I thought you'd walk into a trap and die trying to save me. Nothing could have stopped me from coming for you," Min-ho said fiercely, tilting her face up to look at him. "Not an army. Not the police. Not the entire Korean government. You're my whole world, Nima. You're the only thing that matters. I would have burned this entire city down to get you back, and I wouldn't have felt a moment's remorse." That night, after the doctors had checked her over and found only bruises and minor injuries, after the police had taken her statement and Min-ho had paid them handsomely to make the whole incident disappear from official records, he took her home and refused to leave her side for even a moment. She woke from nightmares 3 times, and each time he was there, holding her, reminding her she was safe, that he'd protected her and would continue protecting her for the rest of their lives. "Marry me," he said in the early morning darkness after her 3rd nightmare. "Not someday. Not eventually. Tomorrow. I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want you to have any doubt about how permanent this is, how committed I am to keeping you safe and loved for the rest of our lives." Nima looked at him through tear-swollen eyes, her heart still racing from the nightmare. "Min-ho, that's crazy. We've only been together for a few weeks. I know. I don't care about conventional timelines or proper courtship periods." He laced their fingers together, bringing her hand to his lips. "I almost lost you tonight. I held that ransom video in my hands and knew that if they hurt you, if they killed you, I wouldn't survive it. Not because I'm weak, but because you're the only thing that makes me want to be human instead of the monster everyone thinks I am." His voice cracked completely. "Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life protecting you, loving you, being worthy of the gift you gave me when you refused to see me as broken. Let me give you my name, my protection, everything I have and everything I am." "Yes," Nima whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to everything." They married 3 days later in a small private ceremony at Min-ho's estate with only his closest associates and Nima's mother, who flew in from Lagos in a state of shock and joy. Minho's mother had passed years ago, and his father's family had long since distanced themselves from the ruthless man he'd become, but Nima's mother embraced him with a kind of unconditional love he'd never experienced from his own family. "You take care of my daughter," she said in accented English, her eyes fierce and protective. "You protect her heart like you protected her body. You make her happy." "With my life," Minho promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "She's my heart now. Protecting her is the same as protecting myself." The months that followed were an adjustment period that tested them both. Nima moved into the main house permanently, taking over the master suite with Minho and transforming it from a cold masculine space into something warmer and more lived in. She learned to navigate his world of high society and business warfare, discovered that being married to the Ice King came with both immense privilege and intense scrutiny. The Korean media had a field day with their interracial marriage, and the gossip ranged from curious to vicious. Some outlets praised Minho for being progressive and modern. Others questioned his judgment and speculated that Nima had somehow trapped him. The comment sections were often cruel, filled with racism and xenophobia that made her sick to read. But Minho's response was to become even more openly affectionate with her in public, as if daring anyone to question his choice. He held her hand at business dinners, kissed her at charity galas, and introduced her as his wife with unmistakable pride. When a prominent business magazine published a particularly nasty article questioning whether a foreign woman could truly understand Korean culture enough to be a proper corporate wife, Minho pulled all his company's advertising from that publication and made it clear he would destroy their reputation if they ever mentioned his wife again. "Let them talk," he said when she worried about the damage to his reputation. "You're my wife. You're the woman I love. They can accept that or they can work for my competitors. Their opinion means nothing to me. And it should mean nothing to you." 6 months into their marriage, Nima woke up nauseous and exhausted, unable to keep down even water. She'd been feeling off for over a week, attributing it to stress from adjusting to her new life, but when the symptoms persisted, she took a pregnancy test in secret. The positive result left her staring at the little plus sign in shock for several minutes, her heart pounding with a mixture of joy and terror. They'd been careful most of the time, but not always, and apparently once was enough. When she told Minho that evening after he came home from work, he stared at her in stunned silence before pulling her into his arms with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered against her hair, and she felt him trembling. "We're having a baby. You're pregnant with my child. Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly nervous about his reaction. "I know we didn't exactly plan this. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," he said, pulling back to look at her with eyes bright with unshed tears. "Overwhelmed, terrified, grateful beyond measure. You've given me everything, Nima. Purpose, love, a reason to be more than what my father's legacy demanded. And now a family of my own, a legacy I'm choosing instead of inheriting." His hand settled on her still flat stomach with infinite gentleness. "I'm terrified I'll fail, that I don't know how to be a father because mine was so cold and distant. But I'm also more grateful than I have words to express." The pregnancy was difficult from the start. Nima was sick constantly for the entire first trimester, losing weight instead of gaining it, and Minho became almost obsessively protective in response. He rearranged his entire schedule to work from home whenever possible, hired the best doctors in Seoul for her care, made sure she had everything she needed before she even knew she needed it. He attended every appointment with her, asked detailed questions about her health and the baby's development, and read every pregnancy book he could find in Korean and English. "You're going to be an amazing father," she told him one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting possessively on her growing bump while he spoke softly in Korean to the baby. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice vulnerable in the darkness. "My father was cold and distant, more concerned with legacy than love. I don't have a model for this. I don't know how to be warm and present when I was raised to view emotions as weakness." "Then you'll create your own model," Nima said, covering his hand with hers. "You'll be present and loving and protective, just like you are with me. You'll show our child that strength and tenderness aren't mutually exclusive. Our baby is already so lucky to have you." Their daughter was born on a snowy December morning after 18 hours of labor that left Minho pale and shaken. He'd insisted on being in the delivery room despite the nurse's initial protests about his presence, and he held Nima's hand through every contraction, whispered encouragement in Korean and English, and looked more terrified than she'd ever seen him during her actual pushing. But when the nurses placed the tiny baby in his arms after cleaning her up, when he looked down at the perfect blend of his features and Nima's wrapped in a pink blanket, something in his expression softened in a way Nima had never seen before. "She's beautiful," he said in wonder, his voice thick with emotion. "She's absolutely perfect." They named her Jiwoo, a name that meant wisdom and beautiful in Korean, and she had Minho's dark eyes and Nima's full lips and a head of thick black hair that made the nurses coo over her. Minho was utterly devoted from the first moment, refusing to let anyone else hold her except Nima and the medical staff when necessary, changing diapers with fumbling determination that would have been comical if it wasn't so sweet, walking the floor with her at 3 in the morning while singing Korean lullabies in a surprisingly gentle voice. "Who knew the Ice King was such a marshmallow?" Nima teased one night, watching him rock their daughter back to sleep with infinite patience after a feeding. "Only for my girls," he said, looking at her with such open love that her breath caught even after all these months together. "The rest of the world can still be terrified of me. But you two, you get to see the man underneath all the ice." On their first anniversary, Minho threw a lavish party at their home, inviting business associates and society figures and making it abundantly clear that his wife and daughter were the center of his universe. He gave a toast that made Nima cry, speaking in Korean and English about how she'd saved him from a life of cold isolation, how their daughter represented hope and future and everything good he'd never thought he deserved. When someone made a veiled racist comment about their mixed family during the cocktail hour, Minho's response was to stand up immediately, gather Nima and Jiwoo close, and announce that anyone who had a problem with his choices could leave immediately and consider their business relationship permanently terminated. No one left. The message was received loud and clear. Later, after their guests had gone and Jiwoo was asleep in her nursery down the hall, Minho and Nima stood on their bedroom balcony looking out at the city lights of Seoul spread before them like diamonds. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly, his arm around her waist. "Saying yes to the job that day? Letting yourself get tangled up with a broken man who didn't know how to love?" Nima turned to face him, cupping his jaw in her hands with infinite tenderness. "You were never broken, Minho. You were hurt and healing, and I was privileged to be part of that healing journey. But what we have now, this family we've built, this love we've created, none of it would exist if I hadn't walked into that hospital and seen you for who you really were under all the ice and control." She kissed him softly. "So no, I don't regret it. Not for a single second. Not even the scary parts or the painful parts or the parts where I thought I was losing myself. Because all of it led us here." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers in the gesture that had become theirs alone. "I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. You saved me, Nima. Not from my condition, though you healed that too in ways I still don't fully understand. But from the empty cold existence I'd been living. You taught me how to be human again, how to feel, how to love without fear." Years later, when Jiwoo was old enough to ask how her parents met, they would tell her a simplified version about a hospital visit and a job offer and two people who found each other when they both needed it most. They wouldn't tell her about the medical diagnosis that brought them together, or the kidnapping that almost tore them apart, or the intensity of need that had made professional boundaries impossible to maintain. Those details would remain private, sacred, theirs alone. But they would tell her the truth that mattered most. That love could heal wounds people thought were permanent. That strength came in forms people didn't always recognize. That family was built not just through blood but through choice and commitment and the decision to see someone's whole self, even the broken parts, and love them anyway. And on quiet nights when Minho held Nima close and whispered thank you in the darkness, she would understand that he wasn't just grateful for her presence in his life. He was grateful for the courage it took to say yes to an impossible situation, to risk her heart on a man who seemed cold and unreachable, to believe that underneath the Ice King's frozen exterior was a man capable of the deepest, most transformative love. Their second child, a son they named Daniel Minho, was born 2 years later, and Minho proved that his capacity for love was truly infinite. He balanced his business empire with family dinners and bedtime stories, taught his children to be kind but strong, to honor their dual heritage, to never let anyone make them feel less than whole. He never let a day pass without telling Nima she was the best decision he'd ever made, the smartest investment, the only acquisition that had ever truly mattered. The company thrived under his continued leadership, but Min-ho made sure his legacy was more than just business success and accumulated wealth. He started charitable foundations for medical research into trauma-related conditions, created scholarship programs specifically for foreign students studying in Korea, and used his considerable platform to advocate for the kinds of people society often overlooked or dismissed. "I was invisible in my pain," he told Nima during the launch of his largest foundation. "I want to make sure others don't have to be invisible in theirs. I want to use what I have to make the world a little less cold for people who are hurting." On their 10th anniversary, surrounded by their children and friends and the family they'd chosen if not been born into, Min-ho raised a glass in a toast that made everyone in the room fall silent. "To my wife," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd with the same authority he used in boardrooms but softened with unmistakable love. "Who saw me when I was invisible, who stayed when I gave her every reason to run, who built a life with me when logic and reason said it was impossible." His eyes found hers across the table, burning with the same intensity that had captured her attention that first night in his suite. "You warm more than just my bed, Nima. You warm my entire existence. You thawed something in me I thought was permanently frozen, and I will spend every remaining day of my life being worthy of that gift." Nima's eyes filled with tears as she stood and crossed to him, their children giggling as she kissed him in front of everyone with a passion that made some guests blush and others smile knowingly. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth, not caring who was watching. "My impossible, difficult, perfect husband. My beautiful ice king who learned how to melt." "I love you more," he whispered back, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world, because to him she was. "My brave, beautiful, extraordinary wife. My warmth. My home. My everything." And in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter and the evidence of everything they'd built together from the broken pieces of two damaged hearts, the translator who'd been hired to keep secrets and the CEO who'd been broken by trauma both knew they'd found something more valuable than privacy or perfection or power. They'd found each other in their darkest moments, and that had made all the difference. They'd chosen love over fear, vulnerability over control, and family over the cold isolation that had once defined both their lives. Their story wasn't perfect or conventional or easy, but it was real and honest and entirely theirs, and that was worth more than anything.